Welcome to End Credits. I'm Corey Tibbetts.
And I'm Miles Rourke.
And this is the podcast that talks to people working behind the scenes in the entertainment industry. And we're doing our third live stream. And anybody who's joining us, thank you for joining us. We've already been told that we're fantastic.
Yep.
About a half hour before we even started. So thank you, Vivian.
If you thought we were fantastic a half hour ago.
Wait till we talk. Wow. The beautiful thing about doing live streams is we get to revisit some of our favorite guests.
Yeah.
And we're doing that tonight. Tonight we have Keith Grachow, who we met at Ottawa Comic Con last year. He's an illustrator. He's got a few graphic novels out. He's got some wonderful children's books out. And he's just a really friendly guy. So we thought since we bumped into him again at Ottawa Comic Con this year, we'd have him back on. Well, how are you tonight, Keith?
I'm good. Thanks for. I feel flattered that I'm one of your favorite guests.
Well, it's always nice to have Canadian content on a Canadian podcast.
Yeah.
We're very much an international podcast, but it's nice to have somebody homegrown. So.
That was an easy get.
Yeah. What are you doing? I'm drinking a beer, eh?
Yeah.
You want to come and do the show?
Sure. I was just drinking one. I could grab one.
Tonight, I think this is the first time we've done a podcast in years without beer.
Yeah, we're dry tonight.
Drinking water.
Well, okay. Well, then I don't feel bad. If you guys want beer, I'm gonna grab one from the fridge.
I mean, feel free if you need to. So since this is kind of a brand new format for you, I hope you don't mind if we kind of retrace your career a bit for people who have not listened to the audio podcast.
Okay, sure.
So the first thing we know about you is that you actually worked on some Disney movies, and I believe before that you were a commercial artist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So start from the beginning and work my way forward, or start backward?
Sure, start at the beginning.
Yeah.
Back when you were a lawyer.
I've been a professional graphic artist for about 20 years now. I had done commercial art and graphic design back in the 90s. And actually one of my first professional gigs, was working for a toy company called Play Along Toys, which now I believe is a subsidiary of Jakks Pacific. And they were known in the early aughts as the bubblegum toy company, because they did all the Britney Spears and Christina Aguilera and NSYNC and all that kind of. They did the dolls and all the music affiliated toys. So
I got stuff that when you're an artist working on it, it makes you feel wonderful that you're really contributing to society.
It was soul crushing. I mean, I was very thankful that I had a job. I was very thankful they paid really well. But yeah, it did kind of get to me after a while. However, the one thing I'm very proud of that I was able to work on, that somehow they got the licensing for Enter the Dragon. That was the only movie they got the licensing for. So we got the action figure and doll licensing for that, and so I worked on the packaging, and that was awesome. So if everything else, like, that's the one thing that I can like ignore all that other stuff, because I was able to work on that.
Yeah, life changing right there. Yeah. So then, what made you quit and walk away from what was a lucrative career?
Yeah, that's a good question. The lure of the Great White North. I was actually living in Florida at the time. And I had an opportunity to come up here. I just needed a change, really. I mean, I liked the job I had been at, but I was kind of tired of living in Florida. I know it kind of sounds weird, but I needed something different. And so I got an opportunity to come up to live in Toronto. And also at that time, I figured, well, if I'm going to change where I'm living, maybe I should change the direction of the art I was going to be doing, because as fun as it was to do, like, Enter the Dragon, the other stuff wasn't quite what I wanted to do. So I decided to try to get into my real passion, which was comic books.
Nice.
Yeah.
So how did Disney play into a career in comic books? And how does Disney happen when you're in Toronto?
Well, if I were to skip ahead a few years. So I decided to get into comic book art a bit more seriously, and there's a school in Toronto that offers it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went there for like a year and a half, and it was a great school. I got a real great, I had gone to school before for it, but this was kind of a refresher, and also got me really serious into the illustration aspect of it. And they had a teacher there who had worked for a company that was doing the Disney movies, the Princess and the Frog at that time, and then later on Winnie the Pooh. And I had told her my past, and so she had always said, well, I mean, if you have the experience in the graphic arts industry, if you're ever looking for another job, just let me know. And so I ended up asking her, when I left school, if there was anything she knew of, and she said, yeah, I'm working for a company that's doing the animation for Princess and the Frog, and got an interview, and then I got a job there working for this company.
Fantastic.
Nice.
And you were a colorist on that, right?
Yeah, digital ink and paint. So essentially what the traditional cell art used to be, where if you've ever seen it, it's just like this acetate. On one side you have like the art with the paint, and the other side it's just the line art. Well, they updated that and put it on the computer, but it was essentially the same idea.
So how difficult was that? And I can see that as also being kind of a mundane job, even though you are now working on a Disney film.
Yeah.
It's essentially a digital coloring book.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, there were definitely, with the first movie, Princess and the Frog, there's a lot of different line art, like line color.
Mm-hmm.
So it was challenging in that, let's say you have a scene with multiple layers of action going on. You have a group doing partying, and then in the foreground you may have like the main character doing something else. So you're in that frame, you have all of these different things happening, and it's different colors of line to separate, foreground, midground, background, as well as like each character itself had their own colors for line art. And the artist is fantastic as they are. Sometimes the way, if I back up a little bit, it was drawn traditionally,
Yeah.
and it was scanned into a computer, into the computer, and it was taken through a program that actually converted into a vector line. So the vector line, it didn't always know exactly what it was supposed to be. So you had to do some separating on your own, so that it separated all the shapes, right?
Right.
And sometimes you didn't exactly know what was happening, so you had to contact Disney to find out what was their intent was, or you just guessed, because it takes so much time to do that. So that was kind of some of the challenging with that, especially with scenes where there was different things happening. With Winnie the Pooh, it was much simpler. It was essentially one color of line art, and in that situation, yeah, it was a little bit monotonous. I mean, I still every day I'm like, you know what? Fine, it's monotonous, but I'm working on a Disney movie, right?
Yeah.
Like, I always try to take the positive out of it. So I learned a lot from looking at this traditional art. I mean, that was the other thing too. We had access to all this beautiful line art that was traditionally drawn, and so at any time we can flip through it just to see, what it was supposed to happen in that particular scene. But for me, and I think leading to the next thing you may be asking me, is how I transitioned from that to doing like comic books and children's books. That really inspired me to because before I had wanted to do just comic books. I'd never thought about doing a children's book, but the working on Disney really kind of influenced me, I think.
No, absolutely. You mean you get to see like people who are just masters at their craft
Yeah.
every day, and it's got to be inspiring. And I don't know, did you get to see the roughs, or was it just the vector that you got to get to see?
Well, that's what I'm saying. We actually had access to the traditional line, all of the actual drawn roughs.
Wow.
Nice.
Then so we had access to it, and we would scan it in to the computer, and then it would get vectorized.
Nice.
So we did all of that there, and amongst other things as well. But essentially, we had access to all of the original art.
Nice. So you're actually seeing all the lines of seeing how a character is constructed and
Yeah.
actually put together. And that's got to be very helpful. And it's got to, I know as an artist, like when you see somebody's finished product, you're just like, oh my God, that's so amazing. But if you actually get to see their process in the lines and everything,
Yeah.
then you can understand it better, and then you can start to improve your own artwork. And I know when you're applying for an animation job at Disney, they want to see your roughs. They want to see how
Yeah.
you construct something. They don't want to see an inked final picture.
Yeah.
Good nodding.
Yeah.
All right, so you have some graphic novels already out. Last year I picked up 2 from you at the con, and I've looked at the pictures at least. I've not read them yet, and I'm so sorry.
That's fair enough. I mean, there's a lot out there. Yeah.
I tend to pick up comic books and I use them as inspiration or references and stuff. So a lot of the time I used to have a stack of comic books about yay high that I had maybe read 3 of them. I would just buy them because there were great pages in them, and I would just, when I was working on something similar, I would pull it out and just open it up and have that up here as kind of like, oh, okay, I think I know how he did that, and just kind of try to deconstruct the drawings.
Yeah. Oh, I do that too. I actually, well, so you're talking about Concrete Martians,
Yes.
which is it's a 2-part story that was written by Mitch Cook. And just to go into that a little bit, he and I collaborated together on this a couple of years ago, and it's the story of this town out of Washington State called Concrete. They're listening to the War of the Worlds radio broadcast of 1938. And as they were listening in the story, the power goes out right before they made their commercial announcement that this was not a real thing. And half the town panicked. And so it's our story of what we think happens during this panic. So it's a really awesome story that the writer came across while working for a radio station in Seattle, Como News, and he thought it'd be great to adapt. Essentially, it was from an article from the Concrete Herald a day after the War of the Worlds radio broadcast of '38, and he thought it'd be great to adapt it into an article or into a comic book. And so we just did this as a 2-part story. And to actually go back to what you were saying in regards to the being influenced by something, over the weekend at Ottawa Comic Con, Darwin Cook passed away.
Yes.
He's a huge animation giant as well as a comic book and graphic novel giant, and greatly influenced me. And Alan Neal from CBC's All in a Day, who I'm friends with, came up to me, and we were because I had actually when I released my first children's book, my mom and I did a radio interview with him, and he was very, very kind to talk to us about it. And so he's a big fan of that, and came up just to talk about that and about the 3rd book we just released. And he happened to also be doing interviews about what happened with Darwin Cook. And at that point, I'd known he was very sick, and so he wanted to ask me about my influence by him. And as it happened, Concrete Martians, and I think he knew this, was greatly influenced. If you look at the interiors of it, it's in a sepia tone, it's old school style. And I looked through Parker, Darwin Cook's graphic novel series that had that kind of look to it. And so there's definitely a huge amount of influence that I'd gotten from Darwin Cook. Are you sure you haven't had anything to drink?
Not anymore.
Yeah. Anyway.
He's off water now.
Yeah. Maybe we do need to get you some beers. So he was a great influence on me. So Alan wanted to talk to me about that. Like, I've never met Darwin, unfortunately. So he started talking to me, asking me questions, and I hadn't realized he had died. And Alan Neal hadn't realized I didn't know. So he's actually going, so, how do you, like Darwin Cook just passed away today. Like, tell me about how he influenced you. And I was in shock because
Wow.
I hadn't found out. I knew he was sick, but because you're at the con, you don't really necessarily get the news as it happens. And he had just died. So I was in shock, to be honest with you, but I have no clue what I actually said. But that's, going back to how when you're doing a comic book or some kind of artists definitely are huge influences in regards to, like, you may be looking at their work to see like how they did something, or just to be. I like looking at just to be inspired, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I find that that's mostly what I end up doing is just looking at other people's work to be inspired, and trying to get over the hating yourself because you're not as good as them. But then they can be looking at your stuff going, I can't do that style.
Yeah.
Oh
Yeah, that's hard.
Being an artist is a very self-loathing thing sometimes.
Very lonely world.
It can be.
Yeah.
Not all of us have our wife working directly behind that magic curtain there.
Yeah. So we were just saying, like, because I guess I'm the third video vlog that you've done, and my wife's a photographer. She's a professional wedding photographer, and she happens to have backdrops, and so it's not too messy behind here, but I was just like, well, maybe it's better to have something so it's not so distracting. And my wife's like, well, if you need a backdrop. And so she's stepping up at like 3 minutes flat. And I was pretty much, I was not helpful at all. I didn't know exactly what to do. But now every host or every guest after this has to have a backdrop. It's going to be required.
Absolutely. I don't know if we have anybody in the chat room, Michelle, or people in the chat room. Because if we do, then feel free to jump in and ask Keith any of your questions about art or illustration. We're here for your.
We're here for you.
We're here to answer your questions, or he is. So you had the two-parter, and now the next book, it's Saltwater.
Yes. Saltwater.
It's a continuation of the story, or
it's a loose continuation. It's like if Concrete Martians had a like illegitimate like child or something, that would be Saltwater. It's not really a direct continuation of it, but what it is we Mitch had originally had Saltwater as an idea alongside Concrete Martians. And to be honest with you, I was just so enamored with like the whole era that I'm like, I want to draw more of this kind of thing. And like, can Concrete Martians be like an ongoing story? And he's like, no, it's two parts. There's nothing else to it really. Like, we have a couple like little short stories that we're gonna potentially do with it when we collect collect it into like a graphic novel, but there's nothing else. And so I was distraught, and I did everything I could to think of like, how can I get this continuing? And so when we were talking about doing Saltwater as the next project, I was like, well, what if we set this, in the past or something? It kind of makes sense that because of what happened with the War of the Worlds, that maybe the governments would like accelerate the space program, and so he had to think about it, and he's like, yeah, you know what, actually I could see that, like the World War II had just had happened right after that. You had the Red Scare, so I could see that maybe in an alternate history you may have like the governments of the world funding this. And that was kind of how we decided on the direction of where Saltwater would go. And so the idea being that there's a colony in Mars in the 50s, and it's cut off from the Earth for 50 years. So everybody's kind of stuck in the style of the 50s or 60s. It's so they look like that. And that to me is really awesome because I get to continue to draw in that style. But it does take place in modern time. So it's kind of while what's the word, anachronistic, it also is told in the modern like storytelling. So yeah,
that's cool. Like,
yeah,
I loved the premise of the first book. So just the whole idea of I mean, people did freak out when Orson Welles, did that radio play.
Yeah.
So to have an entire town that does not find out that it was fake, and the outcome of that's brilliant.
Yeah.
And I like the idea of tying the news story directly into that. That's really cool. Like, actually, it's a continuation, but it's only loosely attached to it. But you get to continue that style. It's great.
So yeah, we have a question. John Rolfe, 2006, is asking you, how was your experience at Disney?
Well, okay, so it wasn't actually at Disney. It was a company called Yowza Animation, and so what Disney does is they'll actually farm out certain aspects of movies to different animation houses throughout the world. Disney itself, they take like they obviously come up with the story and the character design and concept art, but a lot of what you're seeing, special effects, some of the nuts and bolts of it, which is digital inking and some of the in-betweening and all that kind of stuff, is done by other companies. And so this company that I had worked for in Toronto called Yowza Animation had gotten I guess they won the bid for doing that movie, Princess and the Frog, as well as Winnie the Pooh. So working, I wasn't directly in contact with Disney. I know that my art director was, and I heard some of that stuff. And I mean, it's Disney. It's a huge company. They pretty much dictate what they want. Like, it's awesome to work on their products. It's absolutely beautiful, but at the same time, you're kind of working along with their schedule. So,
Right.
Again, I mean, there was no complaint on my side. It was just more or less like, sometimes we would be waiting on some work from Disney, and so at times it was a little slow, and then at times, like, we got all of this work coming in, and it was just like a mad rush to get it on, so we kept on schedule.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I personally didn't really have any encounters with. Oh, that's not true. I did when we actually got to see the movie. We had a personal viewing of it, and we had the directors there for that. So that was really
Oh,
cool.
that's cool.
So I got to talk to the directors. And the names of the directors are slipping my mind right now, but I believe they worked on Big Hero 6. I want to say Don Hall, and I can't remember. They were co-directors. I can't remember the other one, but it was cool. It was a very cool experience. But that might have been with Winnie the Pooh, actually. I think Don Hall. But yeah.
Huh. Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's kind of like getting to work. You're working for Disney, but you're not at Disney, so you're not sitting next to Aaron Blaise and Nick Raniere and all these guys. You get to see their work, but you don't get to ask them the questions, I guess.
Well, yeah, not on a daily basis, but as I said, when we did the premiere for it, we actually, I think some of the animators were there, and like because they get to fly up and come to Toronto and witness what we had done. So we did get to actually talk to him in that case. Yeah, so that was cool. But no, not on a daily basis.
Yeah, so you don't get that nice one-on-one mentoring that a lot of the guys benefit from when they're actually down there.
All right, well, John Rolfe here is saying Don Hall and Steven Anderson were the directors.
Aha.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
And he has another question. Are there any challenges specific to being a digital ink and paint artist versus being an illustrator?
Well, you had to learn a program. So there was a program called Toon Boom that isn't just doing digital ink and paint. It's kind of like Adobe, but it's a different company. And Toon Boom, we were very specifically working with the aspect of the vector program that separated the shape from the line art, and so we had to learn that aspect. Once you learn it, the difficulty, I guess, you're not necessarily. So this is a good question, because one of the things that I was thinking about, I do all of the art when I do illustration for comic books and my children's books. In other words, I do pencils, I do inks, and I color. And my question when I was doing some of this digital ink and paint was the actual line art had ink-like feel to it. And I was wondering, was there a reason why they were doing that, or was it, like, did they want that, or was it just like the way that they're moving their hand? In other words, like, I was really trying to get into the art of it. I was really trying to figure out, like, did they mean to make this line like this, or is it because it's supposed to recede or come forward? And basically, one of my superiors is like, just do the frame. Like, don't agonize over it. We've got, like, you very basically, if you have a question about like the particular color of the line, or if something isn't quite, sometimes the two shapes would be coming together and you're like, is it supposed to be like that or not? Otherwise, don't get into, like, she's like, I don't know. Like, it, but I was like, cause it was beautiful to look at. And but the thing is, when there are definitely, while it's a really strong program, when it's vectorized from a line drawing from traditional art, it kind of has to figure out what the artist intended, and because it's a computer program, it's not necessarily going to be accurate. And so it just may have made it like some of those lines may have not been exactly the way that the artist had intended it, or the artist wasn't trying to intend anything and it just came out like that. So at the end of the day, I was just like, okay, well, I guess
Yeah, sometimes it's so soul crushing when you ink something and it doesn't look as good as what was sketched. It drives you crazy. No, nothing else yet.
Nothing else yet.
Wonderful.
Well, those are great questions.
Yeah, I hope John's satisfied with that answer.
Yeah. And we actually do have some artwork you sent that we can put up on the screen for
Awesome.
viewers, especially the saltwater. Since we've already talked about it, we got the saltwater page.
Yeah, so that's the cover, and I'm actually knee deep working on the first issue, which we will have released for September. We're planning on we have a convention called Rose City out of Portland, Oregon, that we're going to premiere it at. It's possible I'll have it a week before for Fan Expo, but it's not necessarily going to be at that show. But and this was actually kind of a cool story in regards to how we were able to have this come about, because we had talked about doing Saltwater right after Concrete Martians, and Concrete Martians, the second issue, ended over a year ago. So we had done a pitch for Saltwater. It was essentially a preview issue that we showed at shows, and we're giving out to like publishers. And unfortunately, we didn't really hear anything from any of the publishers. I think when you're an unknown, I mean, it's not to say that unknowns don't get picked up, but it's more or less if you have finished work, like an ongoing 3 or 4 issues that's already in the can, or a graphic novel, you may have publishers that are more serious about you because they see you have a following, you've been able to do this, and there's a consistency in regards to quality and stuff like that. So we decided that, you know what, regardless of whether a publisher picks us up or not, we're going to do this on our own, because we were able to self-publish the first 2 parts of Concrete Martian. We figured we'd probably be able to self-publish Saltwater. Just the issue is finding either the funding to do it or the time. And really, those 2 are connected, because for me, I am a full-time illustrator. So to work on something that I'm not getting paid for in a comic book could take months at a time. It's just not conceivable. It's not realistic. And unfortunately, we didn't want to lose the momentum of Concrete Martian. So we're like, well, it's kind of have to happen sometime soon. And back earlier part of this year, I was kind of coming to terms with the fact that I didn't know when I was going to get to Saltwater, and we had already you'd start telling people about it. And we were at that point where we're going, well, either we do another like Indiegogo or Kickstarter for it, which we did it, but it's just, I don't like doing it. It's like selling your soul. It's not a comfortable thing for me to do. So we were going, well, maybe if we look for a private funder. And we had planned on asking somebody when we actually went to Wizard World Portland earlier this year to premiere Concrete Martians. And then we were going to premiere the Saltwater Rose City in September. So we were going to kind of start a following in Portland. But actually, before we did that, I actually found a company that was willing to fund us.
Wow.
Yeah, so we were able to get funding for the first issue, and now we got partial funding for the second issue. So if there's anybody out
Wow.
there that wants to be a patron for issue number 2 of Saltwater, feel free and contact me, and we can talk, and I'll tell you exactly what it is that, like, potentially be a character in it. Comic books don't make any money, so it's not like I can say you're going to make money back, but we can definitely talk about being part of the story, and if you're a company, we could, talk about, maybe I can do something for you artistically. So anyway, we'll get my contact information at the end of this podcast, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
So we have another question from John, if we want to.
Oh, well, okay.
What was more fun to work on, Princess and the Frog or Winnie the Pooh? And there's a second part to the question. Were there any differences in the way you worked between the two?
Yeah. So as I was saying earlier with Princess and the Frog, the line art was a lot more complex because there's different colors with each character. So you had to color very carefully to make sure that the shapes and the lines correlated to each other. And there was a lot of complex shapes going on in that story. Whereas Winnie the Pooh, I mean, they're very simple shapes, and it was essentially one line color for, I think, all the characters. So, or it may, I can't remember if it was that they were the same color for all the characters or just one complete color for each character. And I think one complete color for each character, but it took much less time. So one frame of art for like a Princess and the Frog could take you a whole day.
Wow.
Whereas Winnie the Pooh, a frame, you could probably go through like 30 or 40 in a day. It was that quick, right? So what was the second question? I can't remember.
Yeah, it was what were the differences, were there any differences in the way you worked between the two?
So, yeah.
Yeah,
That answered that.
It was it's a lot less guessing with Winnie the Pooh. Once you figured out, like, the only difficulty with Winnie the Pooh was that if you ever look at like old school cartoons, when like, let's say you have Wile E. Coyote jumping off of a cliff and you see his neck kind of pulling, and it's like almost like a weird blur as he's doing it. If you actually look at the frame, it almost be like it wouldn't be the actual shape of his shoulders. It would be like a weird line or something, and the next frame would be another weird line, and it creates like a that effect of that blur. There were some frames with like Tigger where he would be like in movement, and it would almost be like he'd have multiple heads, right, or multiple tails or something. The way they animated it, so that was kind of cool. But at the same time, you had to figure out what you were looking at so that you could actually like do the correct color for the shapes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I think with the motion you'd probably have to mute the color somewhat.
It wasn't so much the muting of the color. It was more that because each of these because the painting aspect was like shapes, right?
Yeah.
If you take the line art, it's just all it is like a shape. It's a weird shape, and so when you're trying to figure out what, like, even though they were fairly simple, Tigger actually wasn't, because he has like lines of like his body has all these stripes on him, right? So you had to fill in each of those shapes of the stripe with a color, and he has if he's moving and there's multiple parts of him that are moving, you have to figure out, like, am I looking at part of his tail, or is this like his part of his paw, or it was, and then on top of it, he was actually in like a costume. So it was more about figuring out what the shapes were that you were looking at, so you can fill in the paint correctly for it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I think so.
Makes sense
Yeah.
to me.
Yeah.
So. If it makes sense to you and you're the layman in that, then
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's explained.
Yeah. Awesome.
I want to get back to comic books don't make money. So,
Okay.
So comic books don't make money. So how are you surviving right now?
Good question.
How does an illustrator make some damn money?
Let me rephrase that, because I comic books do make money, but it's not where you can, not very many people can actually do comic books full time and probably like buy houses and things like that. Like there are definitely, like, I mean, I don't know exactly how many comic book artists there are in North America. I'm sure there's in the thousands, but of those thousands and thousands that are doing comic books, I would say that there's like maybe less than 1% that are able to make enough money per page, and they're probably working for Marvel or DC and maybe like Image book or Dark Horse book. And there are probably some self-published artists and authors that are doing pretty well as well.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the ones that I'm probably more interested in emulating. And those guys either have another, maybe they're like, for me in my life, I do other illustration stuff that pays really well, and then I can do comic book work that doesn't pay as well per page, but because a lot of what I work on is either I own or partially own, or I get a like part of like I get the book at cost. So in other words, I'm pretty good at selling the books that I create. I think Corey can attest to that if he's ever walked by my table. I'm
Yep.
always and so I can sell my books. I know I'm really good at selling them. And so I've been able to figure out how to, I get paid to do the pages. And then on top of that, I get them printed and then I sell those books. So they allow for me to kind of continue on, I guess. And that being said, though, like I couldn't just do comic books. I'm not at a point where if I were just doing comics all year long, that I would make enough. I think that having other, now I am a full-time illustrator and I'm very thankful for that, but I couldn't just do comic books. I have to do other kinds of illustration that helps. And like in advertising, or doing personal illustrations for people, those pay a bit better.
Yeah.
Much better, actually.
But
Yeah.
going back to selling yourself, like,
Yeah.
I don't think a lot of artists who are just coming out of school and whatnot realize the importance of that.
Yeah.
And what a skill that is that you have to acquire, because most artists are introverts.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the thing is, I'm an introvert as well. Like I've had this conversation with my wife and other artists and stuff. I'm very lucky that at an early age, as a job, I've had to be a salesperson.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of got over my whole fear of coming up to somebody and talking to them about what I'm doing. And so because of that, I've been able to take advantage of that skill set and sell my comic books at conventions. But it is not something easy. I know it's not easy for artists to do that. Part of it is the fear of interaction with somebody. Part of it is knowing what to say to somebody. Part of it is the rejection. And I've been able to, and it wasn't like it was just like completely natural. When I first started doing conventions, I was definitely not comfortable initially, but through the more people you talk to and practice your pitch with, and more comfortable you get doing it, and more you realize that, like, if you figure out the right, either you're saying things in a way that people want to look at your book, or that the book itself, just by bringing them over, you're immediately going, well, take a look at this. Just, you may not even say anything to them, but you say, take a look at it, and the book speaks for itself, that kind of thing. That'll kind of build your confidence. And so I'm at a point now where, as long as it's a product I believe in, give me a little bit of time, I can figure out a pitch, and it's essentially like a 5-second thing to say to somebody as they walk by you to get their interest to come over, and then you can go into more detail.
Yeah.
And I have the utmost confidence in my ability to do it. And the thing is, I have the utmost confidence because I sell, right? It's kind of it feeds itself, right? So.
Yeah, you're not one of those artists who's at the con sitting there drawing with their head down, not acknowledging the people walking by. As a lot of artists do that.
Yeah.
And they don't realize how much they're shutting themselves off from those potential customers.
Yeah. Well, or, I mean, I do understand artists doing that, because there are artists they're commission-based artists. Like,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of artists that all they do during a convention is do commissions. So
Yeah.
it's really hard to have your head up. You know, I can do commissions as well, but it divides your attention. You can say hi to people, but there's a lot of people walking by as well, right? So I think some people, if that's their bread and butter, if their product is essentially like drawing the whole weekend, then what they need to do is either get a friend or hire somebody for, like, you know, listen, I'll get you into a show, I'll give you $50 and I'll pay for your lunch or something, to get them to say hi to everybody, right? So you can get and I've seen artists do that, where they get a friend to do that for them, so that way they can continue to take on commissions, or if they're just not comfortable necessarily with people, bring people over, but then once people are over, they can start talking to them about their product, right?
Absolutely.
So I think that's the alternative to doing that if your head's down the whole time.
Do we read the dreaded?
Yeah, because we've covered this question so many times with artists that work for Disney. But John wants to. Why do you think Disney abandoned 2D animation after Pooh?
I actually have.
They were out of paper.
The toilet paper was not around, so they left us with a lot to do. It's actually, I actually do have the answer to this. I was privy to that information. What had happened was they had a whole pipeline of 2D animated movies. So Princess and the Frog, which was released in 2009, I think, or 2010, 2009, I think. It was basically going to be the renaissance or the 2D, right? They were going to bring it back, and it was going to hopefully, you know, mean that they were going to continue to do 2D along with 3D. So there was high hopes with Princess and the Frog. And I believe that they had in the pipeline, along with Winnie the Pooh, Tangled and Frozen. Although I think Frozen was called the Ice Queen at the time.
Yeah.
Maybe Tangled was called Rapunzel or something. Like, there was different names. And they were in various stages of development. So Winnie the Pooh being a simpler story to, like, animate, I think had been further along in the production. And then Princess and the Frog was the first, so they were quite into production with that. So high hopes with Princess and the Frog. It hit the theater, and it was a great movie. It did pretty well, but I guess after you factor in all the marketing they do and what like previous 3D movies had done, trying to think the one that was before it. It's the one with the dog, Bolt, I think.
Yeah.
But some of these, like, you know, like Shrek was making like $1 billion worldwide. So that was kind of like, I think, where Disney was at in their head. They're going, well, you know, we're going to bring 2D back, but it's going to be, you know, opening at 100 million on the weekend, the first weekend, and then after that, it's going to make another 200 or 300 million, and then it's going to make, like, you know, $500 million worldwide, and it didn't do that. Like,
Yeah.
and the funny thing is, like, I believe it made like 106 million domestically, and worldwide it maybe made like, I don't know, 250 or 300 million. So it did pretty well for a movie. It wasn't a Disney, like, as big as Disney wanted, right?
Yeah.
And so effectively, when they got the, you know, I guess when they got the sense that it wasn't going to be the blockbuster they thought, they effectively just, like, dropped the other movies that were going to be 2D, the ones that were more in pre-production, like Tangled and Frozen, and they decided to convert it into 3D. And as I said, Winnie the Pooh is the one that had already been further along. And that was, it was a shame that they didn't really put too much marketing into it, as far as I can tell. It was only in movie theaters for a couple weeks. It was a great movie, but I just think at that point, they had kind of given up on 2D and decided to go along with 3D. That's what I had heard. It's not like I talked to a Disney executive direct. I don't believe I talked to a Disney executive directly about that. I may have actually asked somebody when we did that, one of those previews, but that was what I had been told by somebody.
Oh, so, no, it's the story we've heard over and over again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It all comes down to money. And,
pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. And really, I don't think the success or fault of any movie is whether or not it's 2D. It's just whether it appeals to a mass market.
Yeah, and it's like I'm guilty of flocking to the 3D movies. It's like,
As long as it's interesting.
yeah.
Well, look at it's gotten to a point now, like Batman versus Superman, where that movie made almost 900 million at this point, and they're almost looking at it as a failure.
Yeah.
It's crazy. I know there's a lot of money that went into that movie, but it's just that there's nowadays $1 billion movie. If it doesn't make $1 billion, some of these movies are considered failures, which is crazy to me. But
yeah, well, it's you have to make everybody happy. Apparently, it's
well, the people that fund it have to be happy. That's the investors, right?
yeah. But you have to appeal to a massive audience when you make one of these giant blockbuster movies. I still have not seen the Batman v Superman.
I haven't either.
It didn't.
I have, but
It did. None of the trailers appealed to me at all. So, and there's a lot of like-minded geeks out there like us.
Yep.
Yeah.
So,
Sorry, I didn't give it a chance in the theater. It just didn't appeal to me. So I'll see it later.
Yep.
However, Civil
Probably
War
won't be too long either.
Civil War, that appeals to me.
that was awesome.
So tell us a bit about the children's books, because they're looking at the art styles. They are a huge contrast between the graphic novels you're doing. The children's artwork is so playful, and it's very different.
Yeah, I'm a little schizophrenic, I think. Yeah, I'm a believer that the story dictates the style.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, I'm not like, I don't purposely go out to go, okay, I try to sometimes go, this is kind of the direction I want to go. And sometimes it works like that, and sometimes it doesn't. And with the children's book, just the way so kind of go into it a little bit, I have a series with my mom. She wrote it. So my mom, Amy Grachow, wrote this children's book series called Up in the Sky. And our first book, On a Planet Named Up in the Sky, was released a few years ago now. We just released our third one, Above a Planet Named Up in the Sky. So we're doing very well with those books, and we're actually working on a fourth one right now.
Oh, it's wonderful.
They're all self-published. So she, the first book was, she's a poet and a short story writer, and she wrote the first book as a poem. So it was interesting for me because a lot of the visuals I got from the poem were just really crazy, weird visuals, like butterfly waves and jellyfish clouds, and some of the characters were really interesting. So I think from the poems kind of dictated what the visuals were going to be. And because I had also been recently influenced by the Disney movies, I think that was also kind of in my subconscious or conscious, probably more likely. But that's how that came to be. And so I'm very happy with the fact that they are very different, I think, stylistically from my other stuff. Because I have tried with other stories I've worked on to kind of change it up a little bit. And I always seem to, it's almost like the rubber band where you stretch it and it just eventually goes back to the original shape. That's my art a lot of times, where I'm like, okay, I'm going to go crazy with how the characters look, their anatomy and some of the compositions. And sometimes it just doesn't work like that. So, however, I have been, worked on some stories where the story is kind of dictates how it's going to look, and it does end up looking a bit different from other things I've done. So, but in the case of the children's book, that was pretty much my mom just coming up with crazy poetry.
Well, I think when you've done a lot of commercial art and you've been an illustrator for hire, you naturally start to switch styles up a lot.
Yeah.
And well, you have to, because one day you're working on user interface for a video game, and the next day you're illustrating a children's book, and then you're doing a comic book. So
Yeah.
you have to be versatile.
Yeah, John's got he's firing off questions here. So, what inspires you as an artist, and what helps you get over a creator's block?
Creator's block. I don't really get creator's block too much. I'm of the mindset of just kind of pushing through things. So I've never been in a situation that I can recall where like I just can't draw at all. I just kind of like I definitely have times where I don't like what I'm drawing at all, but I just kind of push through it. Um, but I mean, some of the things I do, if I feel like I'm a bit drained creatively, one of the things that I try to do every day, that I've implemented into my process of doing work, is I'll do like a bunch of doodles for the first hour or two of draw of the day, just to loosen myself up. So that way I'm getting into like what I'm doing. It kind of helps focus my mind's eye a bit. Another thing I'll try to do every once in a while is get away. Like going to conventions are always great because I don't really do that much drawing at a convention. So when I come back, I've kind of been away from drawing for a few days. So I feel like, I can get back into it.
It's really weird to go to a con to feel refreshed.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm drained after convention, but it takes a different mindset for me. As I said, I am introverted
Yeah.
for the most part. Uh, and being out in the world, I kind of have to use a different part of my brain. So that helps me. And then I like to or just do like life drawing, go out and draw people, or go to a place that's just beautiful and draw scenes and stuff like that. So those are the things that kind of get me loosened up, I think, or my creative juices flowing. So, and what was the second question?
Well, that was pretty much it. I think it was all one thing. What inspires you and what helps you get over the creator's block?
Yeah. Inspires
though? Yeah.
Yeah, like inspires me. Well, other artists, as we had talked about earlier, looking at other artists' work. I guess just, I don't know, reading books that have nothing to do with art at all. Like just doing things that are not necessarily directly related to what you're doing, because I think that when you're like, if you're drawing comics all day and all you're reading are comic books, you're just getting like, you're kind of limiting yourself. I think there's nothing wrong with like looking at comic books for inspiration, but I find that like if I read a book, it's a novel or something like that, or watch some kind of TV show or a movie or a documentary, that kind of stuff inspires me. It'll give me ideas for sometimes watching movies or TV shows just give me ideas for like panels, like the way they're setting up their shots. So I'll go, oh, that's kind of an interesting shot. Or a book I'll read a novel and I go, oh, that's kind of a cool like a plot point they have in there. I wouldn't say I would like, I'm not steal something, but the inspiration from that plot point, you go, maybe you're working on something and it kind of gives you an idea, right? So.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that as a musician. It's like if I'm writing something that's going to be operatic metal, the last thing I'm going to listen to is operatic metal.
Yeah.
So I'll go to classical music or soundtracks or whatever, and so it's kind of still in the same vein, but it's not the same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Well, we've got about 5 minutes until we've been doing this for an hour. So I know you're involved with a Kickstarter right now.
Yeah.
It's not your Kickstarter, but you are involved. So maybe you want to promote that a bit before we're gone.
Yeah. Okay, so it's a book called The Lost Hallway. So it's a children's book that I illustrated, and the writer's name is Peter Reynolds, and he's doing an Indiegogo fundraiser that actually starts tomorrow. So if you're interested in at least finding out how to get to the fundraiser, you just go to losthallway.com. So it's as it sounds, losthallway.com. And nothing strange or weird about the spelling of it. Yeah, so the book it's a fun, it's actually kind of, I like doing whimsical stuff, I think. With my Up in the Sky book series, they're very whimsical. So when I was approached to do this book, I think it was very natural for me to be able to do something like this. And Lost Hallway is about this boy named Griffin who can't find his dog or can't find his ball. And so he's looking everywhere, and somehow he gets into this place called the Lost Hallway, where all things lost go to be found. So it's like lost keys and lost phones and lost toys. And so it's just a lot of fun imagery from that. Like I did this one spread where it's where lost hair goes from people's heads. But the thing is, when
awesome.
I was drawing it, I'm going, how do I draw like hair and make it interesting? And when did they really? It took me a while to like kind of go through a couple of different iterations of it, and finally I'm like, you know what? Why don't I make the hair characters? And once that clicked in my mind, it was very easy, and it came to be one of my favorite spreads I've done for the story.
Oh, that's
So,
really cool.
yeah, it is. It's a really fun book, and there's already I know that he's written the second book, so I believe I'm going to be working on that later this year. And the book itself, this is where I don't want to necessarily speak for Peter, but so you have to go to the website as well as the link to the fundraiser page to find out a little bit more about it. But I believe that they also have connections with hearing impaired people, so they're going to do something. I think in audio, if they get to a certain level, they're going to do something for that, and donate. There's a donation involved with it. But again, don't quote me on it. Go to the page to find out if that's something that you're interested in. It's thelosthallway.com, and the fundraiser starts tomorrow.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
All right. And so if people are not at a comic book convention, where
Yeah.
can they go find your books?
Okay, thank you. So kgrachow.com. So kgrachow.com is my website, and they can go there and check out all the work I've done. There are places for you to contact me if you want to order my children's book series. So I have 3 in the series: On a Planet Named Up in the Sky, Above a Planet Named Up in the Sky is the newest one, and then What Does Slog Do? And just to give you a little synopsis of the books, it's about kids that live on this planet named up in the sky, and they go on different adventures, and each of the books is a really kind of cool little moral and theme to it. The latest one is about this little kid named Plus Minus, he's like a robot who is in a spaceship and crash lands up in the sky. He's okay, but his ship needs to be repaired, and the kids on the planet want to help somebody in need, so they go find parts for his ship and help repair it and then send him back to his family. So it's stuff like that. You could also email me, kgrachow at jnkimagery.com. So jnkimagery.com, letters J and K. But you can get contact information as well on my website. And then I have the comic books, Concrete Martians, as well as if you want to get me for some illustrations, for personal illustrations for yourself or family, I do that kind of stuff as well.
Fantastic.
Well, I think we have time for John's last question here.
All right.
Okay, John.
What kind of work do you find most fulfilling? Children's books, comics, or something else?
Well, actually, I find fulfilling having the ability to do all of them. I like that I have, in a year, I'll go from working on a comic book to a children's book to doing personalized illustrations for families for like birthdays or what have you, or I'll do something for like a company for like a convention of theirs, like illustration work for animation, all that kind of stuff. I get all that kind of stuff coming in. And so that to me makes me feel fulfilled because it kind of challenges different parts of my brain, I guess. Like it's different challenges. So, working on a comic book is like running a marathon. And then after I do that, I don't want to run another marathon. I would like a short sprint before, I have to do that next marathon. So that kind of stuff helps me do that.
Cool.
Fantastic. All right. Anything else you want to plug before we go?
Yeah, so if you want to, you're welcome to like me or follow me on Facebook. It's under Keith Grachow. Again, my last name is Grachow. Or you can at Kate Grachow on Twitter. Or you can like my Facebook for Up in the Sky, which is On a Planet Named Up in the Sky. Or if any of the Concrete Martian or Saltwater is on Facebook as Kikamika. Or you can go to the website, kikamikacomics.com. And that's KIKAMIKA comics.com.
Nice. All right. Well, thank you for coming back and doing this video experiment with us.
Next time we'll definitely have to have beers. I was
Yeah,
thinking
for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Well,
You know.
next time you come to Ottawa and do a con, we should sit down and do this just in the same room.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Then-
We're
we-
signed up for next year.
Yeah, we don't even have to have a podcast. We'll just drink beer.
Yeah.
Any reason to drink beer with me is fine.
Exactly.
That's for sure.
But unfortunately, I kind of didn't realize this was a holiday Monday when I booked this, or I'm sure we would have more than just John asking questions. Everybody's at the cottage. So
Yeah.
I apologize for that, but we'll try and do better next time.
But yes, thank you, John Rolfe,
Yeah,
2006, for all your questions.
Yes, they were great questions, pretty well thought out. Other than the 2D animation question, we get
Yeah.
every time we have anybody involved in art or animation.
But this one ended in poo.
It did.
Yeah.
That's great.
It's always good when it ends in poo.
That's right. All right, well, I guess we'll wrap this up. Thank you again for coming on, Keith.
Thank you.
I find it so awkward to end a video podcast now.
Yeah.
We can't edit. It's weird. But yeah, that's it for this time on end credits. Until next time, roll end credits. See, it's weird.